dun, 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 you're coming. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, why is it not? There we go. And she's back.
Hello, sorry, I hadn't quite realised I was kicked out.
Oh, you were. You were. I sent you a quick suggested list of cues.
Was that via email?
Yeah, but it really is a case. The audience is either zero or very limited, with a very few exception of leading professionals in the space. So what I like to do is just constantly come back to what's happened since the last thing. What do you think are the implications of that going forward? What does it mean for business? What's WBCSD doing? What's We Mean Business doing? That's really all we're going to do. We'll get into the nitty-gritty in September because these are only half hour at the moment. But the next one will be an hour because we'll have a few more people, hopefully yourself and or you in October, and they will be more detailed. But this is more about the vibe of what's happening rather than necessarily the minutiae, because most of the audience, that's not entirely fair. Some audience are interested in the finance aspect, some are interested in Article 6. And of course, we've got an ongoing discussion about what happens with
Yeah,
our NDC at the moment. So it's
great. I mean, I don't tr I,
it's
honestly,
that kind of audience.
I don't track too closely the negotiations elements of it. Really more the action agenda
And
and what's evolving around that. So
and you won't
yeah,
have
just
to, because I will give that context in this way. So I put up this. Why is it not going to that? Now it is. Um, because we have what's called a tracker, and
okay. Yeah,
the members have access to this document on a real-time basis. But the the audience is both members and non-members. So I show them this as a bit of a
okay.
teaser. All right.
Yeah,
This is what you're missing out on, peeps. And so I will go through a very quick, this is what happened since the last one we did, that
yeah.
we understand it. And so that helps you know where I'm going.
Okay, great.
And one of the big things you need to know, hang on, there's two other people in the room. Let me just see. They're attendees, and I'll just check that neither of them are Karl. No, they're not. The big thing that you need to know is that Simon Steele was here, as you would hopefully
Yeah,
have heard, and that he met with a lot of people, to be blunt. And the key message from him was business, get behind government to make the NDC ambitious. He was not here to talk about COP31, but you could get the inference from what he was saying that
yeah.
business, if you want 31, you're going to have to be getting behind government to be ambitious. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, with Karl and We Mean Business, BCSDA also published, the what do they call them? The investable NDC investable
See,
series. We did one for Australia with CANA, the Climate Action Network Australia, and it articulated a target of 75% plus by 2035, which is morphing into a big conversation in Australia about companies like Fortescue and IKEA and Unilever arguing that it should be at least 75% by 2035, if not higher. And BCSDA members can't get higher than 75, so we can't do that. But what we did say is if you're going to have a target like 75%, it has to be science-based. It has to have the correct apparatus in place for the market to come in and invest in it. And you have to have a structural blueprint government for the success of the plan. So that's kind of where we went with the benefit of Karl and Greg and Andrew Pragg with Simon Steele. And that's also been provided to our domestic climate change minister as our line in the sand, as it were. What else is happening in this country? Well, we've got an opposition that thinks that there's no such thing as net zero anymore and they should get rid of it.
I think that's happening, yes, everywhere. I mean, I always said a few years ago in the UK we were lucky to have a consensus across the political parties on this, but yeah, that has broken down.
I see UK doesn't have that now either.
No, so the Tories are now saying that net zero is too expensive, it's unachievable.
Really?
This is because of the pressure from Reform, so the new party, the new further right party.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I think the whole thing can be solved by pictures of these politicians in compromising positions with a goat, and it will crystallize the whole narrative. It really would. Yes. So, oh, by the way, we're in practice session. We're not in the webinar. So anything we're saying isn't going to be taken down and used against us. Um,
Good.
Now, I will open, I will do an acknowledgement of country, and then I will basically read out in my own inimitable style what you see on the screen about the key developments. I will then take that off, and then with any luck, Karl has already also arrived, and I will then introduce both of you, and we will then go into a chat session, the three of
Great.
us.
Great.
Ilona hopefully is joining, but I'm not entirely sure. That's why I've added her as the potential question for her, but I'm not sure she's able to actually come. It's a bit of a busy time at the moment, given the expectation of COP31, which still remains.
I have got to leave at the top of the hour,
Oh,
so
we usually try to finish like a minute before it finishes,
okay,
but the
great.
scheduled half hour. So what are we up to? We're up to 4:29.
Is there any further news about COP31 or not?
To the extent that Minister Bowen and the Prime Minister are going to Unga, I believe they believe that the announcement will be made either before it or at it.
Okay.
So that's what our expectation is. Oh, okay. How are we going? A bit sloppy when it comes to attendees, but we haven't hit 4:30 yet, so I won't. Yeah, so the answer is no, but behind the scenes they are preparing for. And I emailed Lewis that sort of cryptic comment about we need to set up a conversation between DECU and WBCSD because they're looking for insights about how to engage with business, which is great. And the first meeting will just be a meet and greet, but there will be probably another one within a few weeks from that saying Minister Bowen would like to meet Peter Backer and others in New York. How would that work? What can we do? That sort of thing.
Great.
All right. Let's start because it is 4:30 and I will start. Let me turn that off. Let's get started. And we are just welcoming people into the room. Everybody's obviously preparing furiously for other things at the moment, which is why we don't have too many joining us, but hopefully soon. And welcome this afternoon, Australian time, to our next session on the road to Belém. My name is Andrew Peterson, and I am the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. the global network partner of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and also the focal point for the We Mean Business Coalition here in Australia. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to a very lively discussion in the next half hour with our dear friends and colleagues, one of who's just disappeared, Karl Vella there he is, Karl Vella from We Mean Business Coalition and Jennie Dodson from WBCSD. As we always do at BCSDA, we start with an acknowledgement of country. I am coming to you today from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and particularly welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us today on this webinar. So what's been happening since we had the last one? Well, the last one you heard on the 22nd of July, so not quite a month, but there have been some developments, and what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a very quick run through, as you can see on the screen, about what we think is happening, but then we'll turn to our experts, Jennie and Karl, for their observations and a bit of Q&A, and then we'll round out before the top of the hour. So what has been happening? Well, as I understand it, the first is the COP presidency, and the lead negotiator from Brazil has interestingly clarified that COP30 isn't going to seek a single headline deal, which is perhaps a bit surprising to some, but rather they're going to advance a number of different tracks linking the updated NDCs, assuming that there are any, enough in terms of a healthy number to be able to talk about, and as well as the conversation on biodiversity and forest finance, and then a debate and discussion and hopefully outcomes on high integrity carbon markets and adaptation governance. So it's still quite a lot to be talked about. Their aim apparently is to lock in durable frameworks, as they call them, to carry momentum into the post-2025 climate change regime. And when you think about it, that's quite a large work program for the presidency that may run COP31. Australia or Turkey, I'm looking at you. The second is, and it's become probably the biggest issue because it starts to, in one sense, corrupt the ability of a COP to be held well, is the logistics. And they are becoming quite a flashpoint. Accommodation in Belém is at breaking point. There's basically nowhere to actually stay for anything under a reasonable price. And I was surprised when trying to find somewhere that I was told that 10 times the usual rate was actually a reasonable price for a room with no view, no running water, and perhaps not even a bed. So, you know, you're kind of starting to wonder whether or not you should go. Apparently, Brazil has resisted relocating the COP, but rather expanding capacity via cruise ships. So looking forward to that, RSL carpet. Municipal facilities, so perhaps staying in education facilities, and private sector partnerships. And I'm not quite sure what that means by that. The UNFCCC Bureau, meanwhile, has urged transparent allocation to protect the equitable representation, primarily for the benefit of small island states and least developed countries. And we'll see how that's going. I know that the Australian government has been working very hard to support our Pacific brethren in that regard. The one that's probably most of interest to all of you on the call, though, is this new, and I flagged it last time, this new aspiration around business and subnational ambition, where the presidency is confirmed now that it will push for voluntary corporate and local government climate targets within the COP30 formal outcomes. Quite how that will work is anybody's guess, but is something that I think business now needs to pay a lot more attention to this COP than perhaps they first thought they needed to, because it will create a new form of visibility for non-state actors because they are considered not to be part of the actual negotiation outcomes of a COP because they are not an actor pursuant to the obligations under the United Nations charters. But it will also mean that there will be new increased scrutiny of greenwashing risks. And I think that this explains why the Australian Parliament has recently gone and delayed its greenwashing inquiry into next year because it wants to see what the outcome of any negotiations from this COP will mean for national implementation. We also have pre-COP diplomacy intensifying. The Pacific and African delegations are now using their August ministerials to coordinate on adaptation metrics, on fossil fuel phase-out language. Stay tuned for that. And of course, financial transparency, which is just an ongoing dialogue. You could write a song in the format of a blues song about how we're never going to get appreciable and long-term finance. But we'll move on from that. And for those of you who are not aware, you clearly haven't been reading either anything BCSD puts out or its colleagues and counterparts on LinkedIn, but Simon Steele, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary, was present in Australia the 28th to the 30th of July. And it was a rare opportunity for direct engagement with the Secretariat on the COP30 equity agenda, on NDC ambition, and then, of course, on Article 6 market integrity. So these things are the framing going into our conversation with dear colleagues about what they see is coming down the line for this COP. And so opening and welcoming Jennie and Karl into the conversation, I guess firstly, I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to SB 62, the negotiations at Bonn, and ask you, what do you think were the most significant takeaways for you from the Bonn negotiations? For example, do you think there was anything that surprised you, either positively or negatively? And were there any real moments that you think which shifted your view on what's actually achievable at this upcoming COP? Why don't we start with Jennie and then we'll go to Karl. Jennie.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Lovely to see you all. And I think I'd put together Bonn and London Climate Week because they went off the back of each other. And actually, the presidency and Anna Tony, the CEO, actually decided to spend a lot of time at London Climate Week, which is also an indication of where they were putting their energy and effort. I think a few things on both angles, the negotiations and the action agenda, just to cover off. So I think on the negotiation side, I think similar to what you were saying, I think it's quite a surprise that the presidency is not leaning into the political weight that's needed and the headline outcome that's needed in response to where we're going to likely be, particularly on NDC ambition. So I think there's a lot of concern about the level of political weight and the political plan that's in place to really ensure a successful COP. I think there was some progress on the negotiations, but I think that was a big insight, and there's a lot of push and a lot of discussions around that, as well as there is still not a clear sense of what the narrative is and what the big headline outcomes need to be for COP to be a success. I think what's really interesting is the approach that they're taking on the action agenda. So this shift towards implementation, and I think that's definitely from a country that's potentially going to be hosting COP next year. That's the really one to keep an eye on. So they obviously set out and announced it in Bonn, this approach to really linking the action agenda to the global stocktake. So using that negotiated agreement that was already out there as the framework for what needs to be done and where the action needs to be taken forward in order to close the gap. And setting out a process which is really about increasing transparency and visibility of the action that's already been taken. And that's aiming to create a positive narrative into COP30, right? To creating a sense of there has been momentum. Look at all this action that has been taken, people making progress, and then really pushing towards what are the specific levers of change that need to be the focus for further efforts. That will hopefully come out as these plans of implementation that will come out of COP30 in the action agenda. But that is the big, I think, space for really setting up COPs in the future to be what the private sector needs. And that's a lot of what we're leaning into now is what does the 5-year plan look like for the action agenda going forward, and what does business need for that, and how do we create that, make that into the space that really drives action, visibility, transparency in a way that, as you said, Andrew, doesn't lead to greenwashing.
Exactly. So let's, Karl, in answering that question about the Bonn outcomes, I want to layer onto that another one, which is, so particularly given what Jennie has said and the suggestion of what I've outlined, Do you think that COP is actually on track to deliver meaningful outcomes, or are we starting to see some early warning signs that this is not going to be the Paris Agreement moment plus 10 years on? And maybe it's not a Copenhagen, but it's certainly not going to be that pole tentpole event, as I like to call them, that COPs are. It could be somewhere between an implementation COP or a really important COP, or it could just fail. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and once again, thanks for the invitation. Great to be here with all of you guys. Yeah, first of all, fully subscribe to what Jennie said in terms of the framing of the objectives for the COP and perhaps the lack of clarity for the time being from the Brazilian president in terms of the big outcomes that we're aiming towards. I think when we look at this COP in the context of, let's say, the UNFCCC, its existence, and sort of the 10 years since Paris, COP30, it's like a big milestone COP on paper. But as Jennie said, perhaps the uncertainty is that we still aren't sure exactly what the big headline is going to look like, what the big landing zones are going to look like, what success really looks like for this COP. And I think this is sort of starting to worry or concern people. It is definitely not going to be another Paris Agreement Eureka moment. It's not even going to be like a Dubai where we're sort of working towards a big converging deal on something like a global stocktake. This COP was always going to be about the deadline for the new NDCs, right? So a lot of the success of this build-up and momentum towards COP30 was always going to be about to what extent we will be able to get ambitious NDCs that will close the gap to 1.5. And at the same time, with the focus on implementation, how are we going to start unlocking those solutions that will help drive the implementation of the Global Stocktake Agreement that was agreed a couple of years ago. There's still a lot to play for, I believe. I think when we look at the discussions in Bonn and the negotiations there, they were very, very tough discussions. There were lots of discussions that were fraught with agenda fights, different groupings sticking to their negotiating positions. The US wasn't present for the first time, so that is also a telling sign. And so this really tough meeting in Bonn, I think, was really contrasted by what was happening in London at the same time, which was a much more positive conversation about, solutions, a much more positive conversation about the role of business working together with governments, a much more aspirational and forward-looking meeting or sets of meetings where people were actually talking about the opportunity and the need to work together to develop the solutions and put them in place. So I think I anticipate that this will also perhaps be what we can expect in Brazil. And I say Brazil specifically, not saying Belém, because we will definitely see perhaps the same challenges with regards to the negotiation and negotiated outcomes when it comes to what will happen at the COP itself in Belém. But we also know that a lot is happening in Rio and Sao Paulo the week before, and we anticipate that will be a big mobilization moment for civil society, not only business, but subnational governments, different parts of civil society movements will be going to Rio and to Sao Paulo to really show that business is staying the course and that there is evidence of strong implementation and strong opportunities for action.
Okay, so let's now talk about both of your organisations' prelim and work towards this particular COP, and we'll start with Karl. What is the work of the coalition from its perspective that it needs to put in place and is putting in place in relation to particularly to business commitments going into this COP, and what needs to be done? Are there areas specifically that you think business are now moving faster than governments? And what is the coalition hoping to achieve at this particular COP at the moment that we know at least is going to be held in Belém in a circumstance of some constraint, particularly in relation to what its outcomes are and let alone where you stay. So, Karl.
Yeah, so the first thing I think we are tracking and engaging quite closely with the presidency and with obviously key partners, including obviously WBCSD, is the COP30 action agenda, because this is really the central effort by the COP30 presidency to link up the negotiated outcomes from the global stocktake to this implementation focus. And so understanding what that means for business and how business will engage is going to be critical in terms of, helping to mobilize and channel business efforts and business messaging towards that. So we're engaging in discussions to understand how can we focus and rationalize this COP30 action agenda into key asks of the business community to be able to rally behind going into Belém. From a Green Business Coalition perspective, what we've done over the past months is work towards developing a new narrative playbook for business in terms of how we talk about business action. As I said earlier, lots of the companies we work with are extremely committed to the climate challenge. They're staying the course. They've told us that they want to keep on investing on climate, but they need to talk about it in a different way. And so we developed this new narrative in terms of how businesses can talk about climate action and the efforts that they're putting into it in a way that resonates strongly with the current geopolitical scenario that we are in. And specifically on that, we'll be looking to identify a number of outcomes that we want to see coming out of Belém, and we're developing a campaign to rally businesses behind these outcomes that we want to see, focusing specifically on showing that business is taking action, showing that the commitments that business has made over the past years are being delivered against, and that business is intending to take action against new commitments also in the context of the new NDCs as well.
Okay, so Jennie, let's now move to you and ask the same sort of question. How is WBCSD positioning its business engagement going into COP, and in particular in relation to the action tracks?
Thanks, Andrew. And can I just say one thing, building on sort of what you're talking about COP earlier? I think we do have to think about COPs differently moving forward. And this is what the presidency's been wrestling with, right? We've done the negotiations, the process is out there. What do COPs look like? And actually, I think we all know as we get into implementation, it becomes a lot of different complex sets of actions. And so I think we are less going to see big, everybody coming together around specific efforts. It's more around how do we identify the big levers of change that need to be shifted to grow markets and scale investment, and use that political power of COPs to drive that forward. And so I think we will see some things around regenerative agriculture, around nature, some things around carbon markets that you will see progress on. I think the big challenge is how is COP framed and articulated as a success out of that, when so much of it has been in the past, and the journalists love, right, the negotiations fight around some particular language. I think there's a few things we're doing. As I said, at the sort of overall, we're obviously working very closely with Women Business Coalition, making that narrative, that story, that common voice and ask. So one of the things we're doing is really on this COP30 action agenda reform. What does that need to look like going forward for that to land and be successful? And that's both around this transparency and visibility of action, but also how do we better identify those levers and really use COP to drive that momentum forward each year. So we're providing a lot of input. Businesses have provided input and feedback. And then we're really trying to support the presidency on this implementation angle. So there's one aspect of it, and there will be opportunities for businesses to engage in the next couple of months, which is the presidency is going to have a communications campaign asking everybody to show up as part of this Mutural to tell their stories of the implementation that they've been doing, the initiatives that you've been part of as businesses, and how have you contributed to that. And one of the things we have is this Business Action Bank, which already has 130 solutions for businesses around the world. We're scaling that up. So that's an opportunity to ensure that you can tell your story, but ensure it's verified, it's credible, and linked into what the presidency is calling a granary of solutions. So all of these efforts and activities are out there. The other thing is we're focusing on some real implementation outcomes linked to the action agenda, where we can show up as groups of businesses that are really delivering effort and can shift on implementation. So those areas are around the circularity. So there'll be the launch of the Global Circularity for Business, around regenerative agriculture. So we're working with the presidency and many other organizations on how do we scale investment and financing to restore land, and on regenerative agriculture. More work on emissions reduction. So how do we enable businesses to work across their value chains to accelerate emissions reduction faster. And then we're also supporting work on carbon markets as well. And there's a voluntary, a coalition to grow carbon markets, which many governments are behind. You should see if Australia's part of it. I think they're looking for more governments to get behind that. And then we're also supporting that on the business side as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you raised the last one about carbon markets, because the recent Productivity Commission report in Australia did bring back the conversation that had disappeared for about 10 to 15 years in Australia about the role of carbon markets. So it'll be interesting to see if it does begin to re-emerge in the vernacular. Look, conscious of time, last question, and it's, you know, that classic one, what's the one thing? But this time it's what's the one thing or the one development or theme that you'll be tracking most closely in the lead up to COP, not at COP, but in the lead up to COP? What are you tracking? Now, I will self-identify just for a moment by saying that thanks to the support of the Women Business Coalition, most recently, we have made a submission to government in Australia in relation to what an investable NDC does look like. And again, thanks to the support of the Women Business Coalition, to WBCSD, the work of Jennie and her team on the Business Breakthrough Barometer is something that is still working its way through the halls of government in Australia, because they're not necessarily as eager to pay attention. Given that we had an election, it's always difficult to get everybody to focus. But yeah, what's that thing that you're going to be looking between now and what is it, the 11th of November, that you think is going to be important for people to keep alive to? Who wants to go first? Otherwise, I'll pick. Jennie. I'll pick you.
I mean, I think it's for everybody, NDCs, right? Are the NDCs sufficiently ambitious? Because that really will set the tone and the reaction. So I think that is I think absolutely in Australia, businesses getting behind, supporting and articulating the need for an ambitious NDC, is an investable NDC, is absolutely critical. And I think that's what we're going to be looking at: what comes through, what doesn't come through. And also, I think there's interesting things to begin to explore around how does business connect better, and we're particularly looking at global businesses connect better and understand what that country national action is and where the particular kind of connection points are and opportunities are. So yeah, I think if it's all about are the NDCs sufficiently ambitious or not? I'm sure Karl will say the same. You can add something else, Karl. I spoiled your thunder.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to obviously mention the NDCs as well, right? And mention this collaboration that we've been working on together with BC Australia and Better Futures Australia to develop a background note on sort of what an ambitious and investable NDC looks like from a business perspective for Australia. We've done this as we in business at a global level. So we've got a report that was launched this time last year that talks about sort of what business wants to see in the development of these ambitious and investable NDCs. And we work with partners in Brazil, in India, in the EU, in Australia, and we're looking to work in a few other countries, including Japan, South Korea, and some others. And so obviously the NDCs are critical, and within those NDCs, it's not just about the target itself, right? Let's say the economy-wide target for that specific country is critical, but it's also about what the government commits within the structure of its NDC in terms of how that target will translate into implementable policies and regulations that will give life to the NDC. In other words, sort of how does that target translate into, for example, targets for energy, for renewables, for electrification, for looking at the financing of the transition, etc. So we'll be tracking these things, and all these things laddering up will sort of set the tone for whether we see sort of an ambitious spirit going into Brazil later this year.
I like that, an ambitious spirit. Excellent. I will use that. Look, thank you so much for your time. Conscious that we're going to give back our audience about 4 minutes, because I always like to exceed expectations. Don't forget that the next Road to Belém is on the 11th of September, I think. And if you've already registered, it should be in your calendar. If not, then by all means, go onto our website and you will find the link. As always, to members of BCSD Australia, the report, our tracker on the progress leading up to COP30 is available through your weekly newsletter on Monday morning through Insider. And a copy of this recording will be put up on our YouTube channel and shared with our members next Monday, and soon after that for those who are not members. But thank you so much to Jennie and to Karl for their contribution. As always, superb, up-to-date, real-time, love it. Hope to see you in Belém if I can find somewhere to stay. Anybody got a room they want to share? I don't snore much. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. And as I always say, look forward to seeing you somewhere in the future. Bye for now.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.